You are listening to the Centropic Oracle, an audiobook podcast of science fiction and fantasy short stories that make you think and feel. It'll Be Fine by Kelly Sandoval. The first thing the crows brought Kate was a strand of wire. They came while she was washing dishes, spiraling down from the cloudless blue sky. The largest settled on the windowsill with the wire in its beak. For a time, it lingered there, the wire scraping against the glass as it watched her. Then it dropped its prize and flew down to the dirt. "They're smart, you know," Brian said, from where he sat on the couch behind her. She turned and watched him push his untouched scrambled eggs around his plate. "They solve puzzles, even talk. You been feeding them?" "Sometimes." Every day for the past 2 weeks. She couldn't bear to just scrape Brian's meals into the trash. Better that someone enjoy them, even if it was just the damn birds. Kate turned back to the window. The crows were still there, scratching about in the dirt. One of them scared a bluebelly out from among the rocks and chased it through the sagebrush. It caught it just beneath her window, darting forward in a bobbing jab and coming back up with the lizard squirming in its beak. The crow's fellows began to screech, those rough, rowdy calls. They jostled forward, snapping at the dangling lizard and snatching chunks of flesh. The strips of meat hung from their beaks, pale gray, iridescent blue, wounded red. Nearly gagging, Kate turned away. But it was silly, wasn't it, to be mad at them for eating? She'd put slices of pig on Brian's plate only moments ago, trying to coax his appetite. She'd try lizard if he'd only show the crow's enthusiasm. She pushed open the window and picked up the wire they'd left. Copper wrapped in green plastic. She twisted it into a circle and slid it onto her ring finger, where her wedding band wasn't. "What'd you find?" Brian asked. "The crows brought it." She held out her hand for him to see. "Well, don't go marrying them." He kissed her fingertips and tried to smile. So she tried to smile back. Neither of them did a very good job of it. "I'll get it back with my first paycheck," he promised. "I'll walk straight from the bank to the pawn shop." Or the casino. But she didn't say it. He was trying, and she was trying. And what else could they do, really, but keep trying? She took his plate, not bothering to ask if he was done. He'd stopped really eating about the same time he started chain-smoking, and she was intimate with the shape of his monsters. It was always temporary. He'd get a job, start eating, stop drinking. He'd be fine. The crows were waiting just outside the trailer, more of them now. And how did the new ones know to come? Brian called them smart. But she'd always thought of crows like pigeons, just sort of there, mindlessly scavenging. They didn't look mindless now, half a dozen black bodies shuffling and shoving to get near her. The bird from her window was the largest, more than a head taller than the others, and paler too, a dusky gray. It was her regular, the only one she always recognized. She'd been meaning to name it for days, but what did you call a crow? They couldn't all be Edgar. Ghost, she decided. After all, he fit the description. A faded copy of his friends. He bobbed his head at her, hopping impatiently in place. "Fine, fine. Better this than another lizard." She scraped Brian's eggs and bacon onto the dirt. From behind her, she could hear him getting ready for a day spent job hunting, or whatever he did when he said he was job hunting. She couldn't make herself turn around. Instead, she knelt in the dirt and kept her eyes fixed on the crows. She'd piled the food onto an anthill. Fat, red bodies swarmed over the cold eggs, only to be gulped down by the birds. As a girl, she'd dug up a similar hill, searching for the promised queen. She'd never found it, and when her mother caught her, crawling with ants and red with stings, but still digging, she hadn't been able to explain herself. Ghost snapped up a last bit of bacon and hopped closer to her, all glossy fearlessness. She could have touched him if she tried. could have grabbed him and squeezed until every last hollow bone cracked under the pressure. It felt good to be stronger than something. "Same time tomorrow," she promised. Ghost chuckled in response, a creaky rock tumbler noise. Then he spread his wings, leading the rest of the flock into the air as a cawing mass that shed ants and feathers as it rose. Were there other houses waiting? More breakfasts? She couldn't imagine a home for them in Golden Valley, unless they were roosting in sagebrush. Maybe they flew all the way to Reno, to the bright neon of the casinos, and made nests for themselves in the silk plants and stunted palms. Maybe she'd see them later, watching from the pillars that lined the Paragon. That night, as Kate pushed out through the Paragon's front doors, she checked the sky for birds. The air was crisp with the chill of a desert night, and the sky was almost empty, the stars washed away by the casino lights. No crows. Just the too loud laughter of tourists and the endless signs, flashing neon promises. Kate lowered her gaze, disappointed. But what had she expected? One present and she thought she had her own little flock of pets? Too eager to commit, that had always been her problem. They were hungry pests, just that. The lights were on when she got home, and Brian was leaning against the trailer with Marcus, one of his old school buddies, drinking and laughing. His smile was real, all the wire-taut anxiety gone. Kate's heart beat a rapid maybe, and she rubbed the smooth spot on her finger where her ring wasn't. Of course, it couldn't be the ring's first, not really. The electricity bill was 2 months behind, the car insurance was coming due, and she'd be dropping $300 on insulin at the end of the month. Brian wolf whistled as she climbed out of the truck, and Marcus smiled in a way that said he didn't mind the show either. "No wonder you make such good tips," Brian said, grinning. The smile felt so good that she spun in a circle, the sequins of her mini dress catching the porch light and sparking like match heads. "You're in a good mood tonight," she said, nodding to Marcus as she cuddled into Brian's outstretched arm. "Good news," he said, squeezing her shoulder. "Yeah?" he asked, so calm and even, not wanting to push, not wanting him to see how hard the past months had been. "Won big at the tables today, $1,000. He kissed her, all smoke and beer and familiarity, as she fought back a burning rush of tears. $1,000. And then he'd bought beer and cigarettes, probably taken Marcus out for burgers. He'd do the same again tomorrow. Wouldn't worry about the job because he'd feel lucky, unstoppable, while the money lasted. And when it ran out, he wouldn't look, because why look when he wasn't lucky? She leaned her head against his chest, so she wouldn't have to look at him. He needed this, needed her to be happy with him. Rich or poor, they'd promised. Heaven or hell. God, everything had seemed so bright then, so possible. He pressed a poker chip into her palm. "I kept one for luck," he said. "Things are going to be just fine now." "Sure," she said. "Sure." She stayed outside, listening to the crickets and the conversation and not much caring about either. She stayed until Marcus left and Brian started to nod off. She stayed after he went in, afraid he might try to talk to her or touch her, and then she wouldn't be able to keep the anger swallowed and tight. She sat in the dirt, drinking Brian's lukewarm beer, and stared at the sky. This far from Reno, the stars fought for space, so crowded she could barely see the darkness between. Too much and too many, like another city, just as garish and crowded as her own. She closed her eyes, just to find a little solitude, and pretended she wasn't crying. Kate woke, aching and cold, her head pillowed against her arms, to a consistent pressure against her palm. Everything hurt, and she knew she'd ruined her nylons, maybe even her uniform, sleeping in the dirt. a rattling croak, a hiss. Kate forced her eyes open at the second noise, expecting to find a diamondback had curled against her for the heat. Instead, she saw the pale crow, Ghost, huge from her new vantage point, his smoky gray feathers gleaming in the gold light of early morning. There was something in his beak, a bit of red plastic. He pressed it against her palm again, and this time she took it. Brian's poker chip. "Thank you. He'd have killed me if I lost it." She sounded as rough as the crow's, her throat raw and dust-coated. She pushed herself up, wincing through the needling pain of blood returning to toes and fingertips. The crow hopped back, giving her space. He had his flock with him, arrayed in a semicircle, scratching at the dirt and eating ants and small spiders. She brushed at her arms reflexively, expecting the creeping sensation of too many tiny legs. Nothing. A lucky night. Yeah, sure. Lucky. She squinted at the poker chip, saw the $50 stamped in gold at its center. Too valuable a charm. She'd have to make Brian cash it in. Ghost hopped toward her again. He'd picked up something from the dirt. His flock followed behind him, carrying bits of plastic in their beaks. He dropped his prize in the dirt beside her, a green chip this time, $100 written with a flourish. The other birds came forward. A $5 chip, then a $20, another $100, a $10, more. She picked up the $20. Fitzgerald's, it said, a casino that had closed years ago. But the $100 said Grand Sierra Resort in small, neat print. They'd just opened a few years back. There'd be no problem cashing it in. The crows watched her, a restless, rustling crowd, their beaks empty and their gazes expectant. Smart, she thought. Smart enough to see a thing, see her holding it in her fist while she slept, and search for more of the same. She was dirty, hurting, tired, and the crows were still watching. She picked up the chips they'd brought, about $300 worth. Less, she was sure, when she tried to trade them in, but something. A few more days, another week, a pair of nylons to replace the ones she'd just ruined. And then she'd figure it out. Again. "Do you guys think you could find Brian work?" she asked as she brushed herself off. They called back to her, a rough chorus of dissent. "Yeah, well, we all have our limits. Hold on, I'll make breakfast." It was too early. Brian wouldn't wake for hours, but she didn't feel like making the crows wait. They were doing their part. She climbed the steps into the trailer, and Ghost followed, hopping up to the doorway and peering in. She left it open for him. Why not? She'd always wanted a pet, and cats made her eyes itch. Brian didn't wake at the sound of her changing from her uniform into a nightshirt, not even when Ghost knocked his watch from the dresser. "Shh!" she scolded, without looking up from her uniform, which seemed salvageable. It'd need to be dry cleaned, but it was only dirty, not torn. The nylons, more runs than material, were a lost cause. She put a pan of bacon on the stove, then added a few extra slices. A waste of money, even though she'd bought the cheapest the store had. Another failed attempt to get Brian to eat. At least the crows liked it. They'd certainly paid for their share. Ghost took chunks of bread from her fingers and leaned in when she tried to touch him. She scratched along his neck, and he made a sound like a fork in a garbage disposal that might have been pleasure. When she brought the bacon to the others, he rode out on her shoulder, and they stood back, waiting for him to hop down and eat his share before they started their usual squabbling. "You witch," Brian said from the doorway. He was shirtless, his hair tousled by a better night's sleep than she'd had, and he was grinning at her. The joy hadn't left him. "You'll be cooking up children next." "Or turning straw into gold." She thought of the poker chips, which she'd tucked away in her purse. Said nothing. "Come on, you." He grabbed her wrist and pulled her to him, leaning down for a kiss. "I'll take you out for breakfast. Nugget buffet. It's been years." "Great," she said. $16 a person, and he'd want to order Bloody Marys. But he'd eat. That was something. Ghost called out as she followed Brian inside, a rising cry like a question. She glanced back and caught him watching her. "It'll be fine," she said. Could birds tell when you were lying? Everything's fine. They brought her flowers, poppy petals strewn from her door to the truck, a carpet of gold. They brought watches, broken dollar store trash, and shining faux Rolexes. They brought her coins still wet from wishing fountains, ATM crisp 20s, and a wallet so thick with cash and metallic credit cards that it must have taken 2 of them to carry it. She called the cops about the last, said she found it after work. She barely took any money from it at all. A man with that many $100 bills wouldn't miss a few. She tried not to wonder where it all came from. Tourists dropped things. It happened. The wallet was harder to dismiss. The cops asked question after question, then told her about the alley where the man's corpse had been found. Still, she fed the crows, same as ever. What did they know of right or wrong, live or dead? They saw the cash and they thought of her. You couldn't blame crows for that. Besides, she needed the help. After a few weeks, Brian's winnings ran out, and he stopped eating again. He grinned through it at first, and she did her best to do the same, ironing his dress shirt every morning like he really might have an interview. She texted him every time she saw a hiring sign, until she noticed how he flinched when she mentioned the jobs, like she'd hit him. She wanted to hit him, to scream, to make him feel what she did. But the anger had thickened into something that scared her. It coiled in her guts like a snake, waiting to devour them. If she let it out, there'd be no second chances, no apologies. She begged extra shifts at work, and smiled until her cheeks burned, leaning over unnecessarily when she brought drinks to the bigger spenders. You did what you did. There was other work, of course, and she knew girls who'd left the casinos for the brothels when money got tight. She thought she could do it, that she wouldn't mind so much. At least there, a guy would have to pay for the pleasure of grabbing her ass. But Brian wouldn't be able to handle it, and most of them expected you to live on site for days at a time. Who would feed her crows? They had a routine now. Every day, breakfast. Every day, gifts. The crows did their best, but sometimes the details confused them. They brought her a wealth of Monopoly money, throwing in the dog token for good measure. And she thanked them just the same. They were birds. Clever birds, but birds. Ghost was always close while she was home, riding on her shoulder or watching from a nearby perch, offering running commentary. He was a good mimic, mastering first Brian's tuneless whistling, then the sound of gunfire from the TV. After a few weeks, he'd learned the shape of her name and other little phrases. Brian hated it, but Kate was charmed. "What do you say?" she asked Ghost one evening, while going over bills. "Car insurance or insulin?" "Aw, Kate," he answered, in that sweet, coaxing imitation of Brian he'd mastered. "Yeah, I guess I'd rather not die." She scratched him along his wings, looked down at all that was still due, and shook her head. "Always something," he said, imitating her this time. "Yeah," she agreed. "Sure is." "Useless, Brian!" Ghost shrieked, and she jumped. Not her voice, Brian's. When had he picked that one up? "Shh," she said, stroking his feathers. "It'll be fine. We're fine." "Liar!" He drew it out, a long sing-song in that rattling croak of his, so she couldn't place who he was mimicking. "Liar, liar, liar!" "Shh," she said again, and held out her fist to him. He climbed on, the bite of his claws familiar now. "Aw, Kate," he said, ruffling his feathers in irritation as she took him outside. "Don't Kate me," she answered. "Go on now, do your bit." "Damn it, Brian!" She kissed him on the beak. "Yeah, damn it, Brian. If you know how to handle that one, be my guest." "It'll be fine," Ghost said, perfectly mimicking Kate's forced cheer. He pushed off her wrist, and his flock rose from the roof to follow. They filled her vision, a joyous, chaotic cloud, then dwindled, becoming smudges of gray against the darkening sky. Brian didn't come home. She waited all that night and into morning, watching the road for headlights and the sky for birds. Brian was always so good about calling, even when he wasn't good about anything else. When he'd seen what it did to her, sitting up worried, he'd promised, and for years he'd kept his word. Often he called slurring. Sometimes he called lying. But he called. She sat with her cell phone in her lap, waiting for it to ring, and calling him every hour, then every half hour, then on endless repeat, calling again every time the line went to voicemail. Around 3 a.m., she called Marcus and tried to believe his groggy reassurance that Brian must have partied a little too hard and parked somewhere to sleep it off. She spotted her crows just after sunrise, the familiar dark smudge resolving into individuals. They landed on the roof in a raucous mass, all but Ghost, who flew to her knee. He was in rough shape, some of his flight feathers missing, his left foot held up and away like it hurt him. In his beak, a diamond glinted. He dropped the ring into her open hand. It was a garish thing, the stone huge, the band studded with emeralds and rubies. Some drunk tourist would be frantic. Kate smiled, thinking of what a pawnshop might give her, and slipped the ring on for safekeeping. She tallied bills, striking electricity off her list of worries. Her stomach twisted when she caught herself at it. Not now. Not with Brian missing. She hit redial again. They said you had to wait 24 hours to call the cops. And anyway, Brian was fine, just sleeping it off somewhere. She took Ghost's foot in her hand, felt the way he flinched. Her fingers came away dirty, rusty red. She wiped them on her jeans, hit redial. The sound of tires on packed dirt. Kate knew what was coming before she saw it. The cop was driving a blue Crown Victoria, antennas clustered along the bumper. Kate stood, and Ghost flew from her hand to the roof. She kept hold of her phone, hitting redial again, even as the woman parked and got out. "Mrs. Angelo?" the cop asked. Kate nodded, mute, arms crossed in front of her. The crows had fallen silent. "I'm Officer Mitchell. Why don't we talk inside?" Kate couldn't make herself ask. Couldn't make herself speak. She led the way in, sat down on the couch, the cop next to her, like they were friends drinking wine. "Brian Angelo's your husband?" the woman asked. She nodded. "There was an incident, a car crash. I'm sorry." The tears didn't come. Nothing came. Kate stared down at her phone, saw she'd called him again automatically. But he was never going to pick up. "Was he drunk?" she asked, the anger bubbling into that hollow space, the exhausted, furious hurt of having tried so hard to hold him up while he was so intent on drowning. "Did he hit someone?" "No other cars were involved," the cop replied. Her voice had gone a bit cooler. "Do you have reason to believe that he'd be driving drunk?" "No, I don't know. He always said he didn't." The past tense came so easily. "He said a lot of things." The cop started talking again, and she just couldn't hear it. It made about as much sense as the crows or Brian's promises. No more of those. No more sunset drives or comet watching. No more untouchable dark moods. No more laughter. No more lying smiles. No more surprise gifts or surprise empty bank accounts. Why did the shock of it feel so very like relief? She fiddled with the ring Ghost had brought her, too loose on her finger. It wasn't that garish, now that she was getting used to it. And without Brian, maybe she wouldn't have to sell it right away. Mrs. Angelo, the cop was saying, I know this is hard, but... I'm not, am I? She asked. I'm not Mrs. Angelo anymore. Let's not worry about that now. The cop touched her arm, and she flinched. Is there someone you can call? No, Kate replied. It's fine. I'll be fine. You're sure? The cop asked, clearly reluctant to leave her alone. I do better on my own. The cop left then, and Kate locked up behind her. She rested her head against the cool of the door and waited to cry. Surely she was supposed to cry. Aw, Kate. Ghost flew in through the open window and came to land on her shoulder. It'll be fine. It would be, wouldn't it? Now, with Ghost on her shoulder, with the crows and their gifts. Without Brian. And she'd loved him. She had loved him. That had been the problem. One of them, anyway. It was almost breathlessly freeing not to have to love him anymore. All the fear, the worry, the hopeless hoping, gone. Ghost made his way down her arm, leaving smudges of blood from his wounded foot. What have you been getting up to? Handle that one, Ghost replied in her voice. Be my guest. Simple mimicry. It didn't need to mean anything. And still, Kate's throat tightened. She scratched Ghost under the chin. You did your bit? She asked. Ghost nibbled lightly at her fingertips, his feathers lifting in pleasure. Aw, Kate. He sounded only like himself. Always, Kate. It would be so easy for a flock of crows to startle a single driver on a narrow mountain road. So easy for them to do so many things. Outside, they began to gather for their breakfast, flying down from the roof and watching the trailer with their bright, intelligent eyes. Kate, waiting for disbelief, for fear, found herself smiling. Sweet Kate. Ghost, gray feathers almost silver in the morning light, sounded sweeter than his kin. It'll be fine, my Kate. It was the first promise she'd believed in a long time. We hope you enjoyed It'll Be Fine by Kelly Sandoval, read by Larissa Thompson. If you'd like to learn more about the author and narrator of this story or make a donation to them, follow the story page link in the description. If you would like to submit a story for consideration or apply to be a narrator, a link to our submission guidelines is in the description.